Hello, so now it's time to fill out your FAFSA. Before you get started, you need to know whose information you will need for your FAFSA. There's a couple of questions to ask yourself. Will I need my parents' information on the FAFSA, and why will I if I do? To answer these questions, the FAFSA has provided a list of dependency questions which determine your FAFSA filing status. Keep in mind, this determination of dependent or independent status is not the same as when you file your taxes. In other words, you could be independent for all intents and purposes and yet still be considered a dependent on your FAFSA, and therefore need your parents' information. Okay, here's the questions you have to answer. If you answer yes to any of them, you are considered independent and will not need your parents' information. Were you born before January 1st, 1998? That's a pretty straightforward yes or no question. Also, as of today, are you married? Answer yes to this if you are separated but not divorced. At the beginning of the 2021-22 school year, will you be working on a master's or doctorate program? However, even if you already have a bachelor's degree, but you are enrolling into another undergraduate program, you would not answer yes to this question. Are you currently serving on active duty in the U.S. Armed Forces for purposes other than training? If you are a National Guard or Reserves enlistee, are you on active duty for other than state or training purposes? Also, are you a veteran of the U.S. Armed Forces? Remember, if you answered yes to any of these questions so far, you are an independent student and will not need your parents' information. These next questions have to do with who you may be supporting. First, do you now have or will you have children who will receive more than half of their support from you between July 1st, 2021 and June 30th, 2022? This is an important one to understand. It's not simply whether or not you may have children, but if you are in fact providing more than half of their support as well. This is the case whether or not they live with you. Next, do you have dependents other than your children or your spouse who will live with you and who receive more than half of their support from you now and through June 30th, 2022? An important distinction here is that unlike with a child, the person must live with you. Next, at any time since you turned age 13, were both your parents deceased? Were you in foster care? Or were you a dependent or ward of the court? Has it been determined by a court in your state of legal residence that you are an emancipated minor, or that someone other than your parent or step-parent has legal guardianship of you? You also should answer yes to this if you are now an adult, but were in legal guardianship, or were an emancipated minor immediately before you reached the age of being an adult in your state. However, answer no if the court papers say custody rather than guardianship. Finally, at any time on or after July 1st, 2020, were you determined to be an unaccompanied youth who was homeless or were self-supporting and at risk of being homeless? This would be determined by either your high school or district homeless liaison, or by the director of an emergency shelter or transitional housing program funded by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, or by the director of a runaway or homeless youth basic center or transitional living program. Keep in mind, for many of these questions, you will be required to provide documentation to your school to verify your answer. Okay, that's it. Now you know whether or not you will need your parents' information in order to file your FAFSA. Please complete your FAFSA as soon as possible. Thank you, and good luck on your financial aid journey.